what would we predict? Find a way to remove those and see if we decrease the die-offs. That's one way, but there's a slightly easier way to get at it too. Okay, so it's tied to the same oxygen thing, and so you would test it by measuring the O2 levels, the oxygen levels, and what do we already know about the oxygen levels? Does that mean necessarily, how else could you test this hypothesis? So one would be that there's a depleted oxygen, but another would be, what's another part of this hypothesis that we would predict? You could look at the forms of those things. You say, okay, are these things changing shape? But you could even do something before that. You would want to look at those. You could just count the numbers of phytoplankton, right? You could say, look, if this hypothesis says that there's an increase first and then there's a die-off, then we should be able to count and see if there's an increase. So in this situation, like I said here, further observations sometimes lead to more information which is helpful in forming more hypotheses. So these scientists that were looking at the river, they were using that scientific method, but the one that's like an interconnected web. And in one of those it says communicating with other scientists. And so they were talking with others about this, saying, we can't figure this out. Here's our situation. What's going on? And then one of the scientists said, hey, you know what I noticed a couple of years ago when I had some fish in my lab in a tank, that I went and we got some water from the river and we were filling up the tanks, just to kind of keep them alive, and that they all started to die off when we took water from this river at the same time of the year. And so then they looked into it a little bit closer and they found, well, that they found this little organism, the Pfiesteria, was in there, and that it was in high numbers just before the fish died, and then it decreased just after they died. So their conclusion was the Pfiesteria is causing this. So if you had that information, how would that change, or would it, your hypothesis? The fish in the river may be being killed by the same thing. Now, it's not a bacteria, it's a critter called a protist, but it is a little teeny critter that could be killing the fish. So yeah, might we say the same critters, the Pfiesteria, are responsible for the fish die-offs in the estuary? Okay then, let's take that as our hypothesis. If that's true, there will be more Pfiesteria in the water during times of die-offs and less when the fish die-offs are not occurring, because they've noticed this isn't happening all the time every day. It's certain months during the year. Yeah, question?
So how exactly did the Pfiesteria kill the fish?
That's a good question. We need to think through that. Okay? They actually, all they saw was that in their aquaria, there's lots of them right before the fish die, and when the fish die, then there's not very many of them. And then they developed their hypotheses. I think it's because of toxin, or I think it's because they actually go and chomp on the fish. So they had to work through that on their own. Okay, and they're still working through